Hello and welcome to the AMCP podcast series, Listen Up, as we take a deep dive into the challenges, trends, and opportunities in managed care pharmacy. Follow the show's social hashtag at AMCP Listen Up, and to learn more about AMCP, visit amcp.org. I'm your host, Fred Goldstein. On today's episode, my guests from LEO Pharma are Brian Hilberdink, President and Executive Vice President, North America, and Douglas Maslin, MD, Global Principal Medical Advisor. They'll be discussing LEO Pharma and their involvement with AMCP. Brian, why don't we begin with you with an introduction and your background?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on this podcast. Happy to be here at AMCP representing LEO Pharma. So LEO Pharma is a dedicated medical dermatology company. We have a history that actually dates back 115 years, headquartered out of the Copenhagen, Denmark area. We've been in the United States since 2010. And our whole kind of reason for being is we want to be a company that prioritizes medical dermatology, really looking at underserved patients, looking at hard to treat dermatological conditions, in many cases, disease states that are currently not being treated, and hopefully bring solutions to the marketplace. We've been privately held for this whole 115-year journey through a foundation. And then we did bring in a minority owner that's a private equity group called Nordic Capital. And we have a potential to take this very old company public in the coming years in an IPO. So that's a pretty exciting development for the journey of this, very historic company.
Yeah, it's really a fantastic journey. And Douglas, why don't you tell us about you recently joined? What made you decide to come and work for the company?
Thank you. So I'm a dermatologist based in the UK. I'm working at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, doing clinics there on Fridays and sometimes on the weekends. And then I joined LEO Pharma about a year ago now. I think there are a few reasons for that. Firstly, thinking of LEO itself, they have a real company mission, which is to improve the lives of patients with skin disease. And I guess as a dermatologist, that's also my aim in practice. So it feels like that is aligned very nicely. And then LEO is a company that's very well known in the UK. So practicing within dermatology, I think dermatologists are very familiar with LEO. It has a strong history, as Brian just mentioned, in terms of topical products initially and then moving into the biologic space. So it's a company I was very aware of and was already interacting with. But I saw there are probably two main areas where I thought I could have an impact, and perhaps we'll get a chance to talk about those more. But one was with a biologic that they were using and are using now in atopic dermatitis. I felt like I could really help communicate the data that was out there on that. And then secondly, LEO is moving into new areas in skin disease, some diseases that other companies weren't targeting. So I thought that was a great opportunity to help in those areas.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So can you sort of cover what areas you work in dermatology and what sort of conditions?
Yeah. So as Douglas stated, we're currently have a biologic for moderate to severe atopic dermatitis. However, we've recently filed a product for a disease state called chronic hand eczema. Now, chronic hand eczema is not a very well-defined disease state here in the United States. It's better understood in Europe and Canada and other places around the world, and perhaps Dr. Maslin can speak to that in more detail. But effectively, what you're talking about is a debilitating condition where patients have hands that are so badly cracked and scaled that they effectively can't use their hands. And if you think about not being able to use your hands and how limiting that is from an occupation standpoint, we've also really come to learn that there's massive psychological impact. Our hands are so vital in communication. Think about that person you meet, and here at AMCP, I'm shaking a lot of hands. Think about that, extending your hand if you have chronic hand eczema, and just waiting for that person to cringe as they touch your hand and they feel how scaly it is. And then you have to maybe apologize for it, or you have that awkward, let's do the elbow bump instead of the handshake. So that opportunity to bring the very first FDA approved treatment for something that is specifically targeting a disease state like chronic hand eczema is exactly the kind of company that we want to be.
Mm-hmm. Anything you'd like to add, Douglas?
Yes, absolutely. So chronic hand eczema is a condition that I see a lot in clinic back in the UK. And as Brian just mentioned, in the US, it's not, people aren't so familiar with it clinically. They still see a lot of it, but they're not so familiar with the terminology of it, or perhaps the causes or the different treatments. There are not so many treatments for that available in the US. In fact, no approved FDA treatments. So that's why I took the opportunity to come, is really to help raise the awareness in the US of this disease state and hopefully bring a new treatment for these patients as well.
Fantastic. And I know you're really active with AMCP. So you can talk a little bit about that, Brian?
Well, we think that AMCP, first off, is a fantastic organization because we all have a shared interest, and that is to make sure that we are providing great value to patients and ultimately finding ways that patients can get access to innovative medications. What we find with AMCP is that it's very much a partnership. It's really about, let's put the data, let's put the patient, let's put the disease state in the center, and let's try to find that unique value proposition to make sure that payers fully understand what it is that they're getting, the value that it can offer from an economic standpoint, and ultimately be able to ensure that patients have better access. So that's where I think an organization like AMCP that's, really kind of helping to elucidate that really puts us in a great position to put our best data forward and ultimately for payers to make the right decision from both a clinical and economic standpoint.
And I know you've been involved in a number of different ways with them, with their students and things like that, as I understand.
We love having AMCP students come visit LEO Pharma. We set up what we refer to as a shadow day. So we have a representative from each of the AMCP affiliates come to LEO Pharma, and as the name implies, shadow a LEO Pharma employee. Kind of understand what's it like in the life of being a medical scientific liaison. What's it like working back office in medical affairs? What's it like maybe working on the commercial side and preparing dossiers for a submission with a payer, just to kind of give them that perspective. So as they're considering what their future career is, also being able to have the perspective at working at a smaller or mid-sized pharma company as opposed to maybe some of the big pharma companies. We just think that that's a valuable kind of paid forward contribution that we can make to a really great organization.
And do you have any thoughts on that, Douglas? Is what you're doing?
Yeah, I think to add to what Brian said, listening to his answer there, you could hear everything always comes back to the patient. So one of the core values for LEO is patients. And whether that's in the drug development stage, the medical affairs stage where I sit, or more commercial on the market access side, it's always thinking, how can we relate this back to the patients? How can we make things better for the patients as a result? So it's great that in your question about AMCP there, Brian's answer, it's always, what can we do to get better access for patients to these medicines? So that's something that really motivates us at LEO in that area.
And can either one of you talk about sort of the size of the dermatological issues in the United States, et cetera? How many people struggle with those kinds of conditions?
Yeah, I mean, first off, when you take something like atopic dermatitis, that's a fairly common disease. I mean, in terms of people living with eczema and then having, kind of more moderate and severe. I think what's really interesting, however, when you look at the number of people living with atopic dermatitis, we know for a fact that right now only 5-6% of those patients are using an advanced systemic treatment, like a biologic, in order to treat their condition. So again, going back to the partnership with the AMCP, with the work that needs to be done in order to really define that value proposition for clinicians and payers is still something that we need to do, because so many patients living with a dermatological condition, whether it's something like atopic dermatitis or psoriasis, which I think we all know somebody living with one of those conditions, or something like chronic hand eczema or one of the more rare diseases, I think the biggest challenge that we have is just this inertia of how many patients are dealing with primary care. Primary care are doing their best, but they're treating them with steroids. We know that there's limitations to using steroids that can be very effective, but only for a period of time. Then getting the patient to a dermatologist, far too few patients see a dermatologist. And then when they see a dermatologist, are they best equipped? And do they also have access to the drugs that they want to be able to prescribe? So I would say dermatology, there is still just so much opportunity to move patients along that clinical continuum and get them into more innovative and advanced treatments.
And I think, as you've talked about, Douglas, people struggle with these illnesses. So being able to sort of right the system at each point where it's difficult. People are very busy, like you talked about in primary care, or getting to the payer market and saying, here's why this should be approved, et cetera, is really where you're trying to focus.
Absolutely.
Through that whole continuum.
And skin diseases, we know, have such a big impact on patients. So there's been studies looking across all the specialties trying to understand the impact on patients for gastro, oncology, rheumatology. So actually, other than oncology, dermatology comes out on top as impact on these patients' lives. So it's really important that we can advance these therapeutics to patients.
The largest organ, right?
Right.
And I think sometimes, I spent many years working in cardiometabolic, and I came over to LEO just about 2.5 years ago. And, when I first told people that I'm going to work for a company focused in dermatology, right away, you get into this like Dr. Pimple pusher, popper.
Pimple popper.
Pimple popper. Yeah. And yes, acne, rosacea, those are common diseases that need to be dealt with. But you start realizing just how debilitating something like atopic dermatitis can be, how debilitating chronic hand eczema can be. And then, Douglas, there are countless rare diseases, skin diseases that are just horrifying. So again, I think you have some big pharma companies that have big blockbuster solutions for some disease states. We know that there are just so many else out there. And what we want to do is find solutions in some of those white spaces and bring treatments that wouldn't otherwise exist if it wasn't for a company like LEO. That's really what our mission's all about.
So hopefully with that answers the question of, why did I join, better than I did at the start. I think you can hear that there's so much unmet need in dermatology. There's a broad range of diseases where there aren't really any approved treatments at the moment. So that's why I've joined, to try and help in that area.
Well, it's fantastic. It's nice to sort of hear the patient-centric that you talk about and the passion, these two P's put together really to focus this kind of thing, because you really don't think about it. I'm thinking my heart, my liver, my lungs, my skin, as you said, it's the largest organ. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think, one of the things at LEO Pharma that we're trying to do is really come up with innovative partnerships with organizations like AMCP, with providers, with patients, because it's been, I have to say, a bit of a humbling experience coming from big pharma to a smaller company. We can't do it with big size and scale. We're not going to be doing, lots of direct-to-consumer advertising anytime soon. You see all of the ads on TV by some of the big pharma companies. So I really feel that if we truly do take that patient-centric approach, and I don't want to sound naive when I say this, I believe the business will follow. And the business has to follow, because ultimately we need to build a sustainable company. But I can tell you, it has been a humbling experience, because you realize when you don't have size and scale to compete with, you need to say, okay, what else can we do? We need to pivot and use agility and our ability to partner and really understand dermatology as our competitive advantage. So that's really what we're endeavoring to do. And, hopefully that comes off just even in the short podcast.
Well, I'd like to thank you both for joining us, Brian and Douglas. It's really a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And thank you for joining us today. If you like this show, you can find all our episodes at amcp.org/podcast, on our show page at healthcarenowradio.com, or on your favorite listening platform by searching Healthcare Now Radio. You can follow our show's social hashtag at AMCPListenUp, and don't forget to share, like, and follow AMCP.org on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm Fred Goldstein for AMCP. Until next time.